Welcome to Inside the Channel, brought to you by Sophos, a podcast where we discuss trends in the channel today. I'm your host, Kenna Johnson from the Channel Company. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joe Levy, who took on the role of CEO at Sophos earlier this year. We'll dive into his vision for the company, the concept of the security divide, and how MSPs can play a crucial role in bridging this gap. Joe, so glad to have you here with us again.
Anna, great to see you too.
Joe, you're no stranger to our audience. Last time we spoke to you, you were CTO, and now you're CEO of Sophos. What is your vision for Sophos in your new role?
It's great to be back. And you're right, I've been with Sophos for quite some time. This coming February is going to be my 10-year anniversary with the company. And I've been in the cybersecurity industry for longer than we've been calling it the cybersecurity industry, for over 30 years. And my focus in my new role at Sophos is to crystallize and clarify our mission. And that is just unambiguously stating and demonstrating our loyalty to the channel and doubling down on our focus on what I think is the most important segment of the market when it comes to cybersecurity service. And that is the mid-market and the small to medium business space. The reason why I think this is so important is because if you look at the composition of the very crowded and very competitive cybersecurity industry, the vast majority of vendors that are out there today are going after the enterprise, and they're effectively leaving this segment of the market, which has a massive surface area, relatively unaddressed. This is why it's so important for Sophos to be attending to this market, because I think it's critical that the industry just does a better job servicing it, given how important it is to the modern world.
How are MSPs benefiting from you becoming CEO?
My background is technical. For people that know me, they know that I started off as a builder and as a practitioner. In fact, if you go back early into my career, I began in the cybersecurity and the IT space as a practitioner with a value-added reseller here in Utah. And I started my career building cybersecurity solutions while I was working at that value-added reseller. One thing I think that it conveys is kind of an empathy that non-practitioners generally have a difficult time manufacturing. I think having done a thing allows for a better understanding of what it means to do a thing. And I think that most of the relationships that I have with the hundreds of partners that I've met over the years throughout my career, and in particular with the MSPs and the MSSPs, the ones who are building practitioner-oriented businesses on top of vendor relationships and technologies, I think that comes across. That sort of experience and that sort of a genuineness, I want to see it infuse. I want to see it shape the way that Sophos operates as a vendor and the way that we build and maintain and nurture our relationships with our partners.
Joe, what are the biggest challenges your partners face, and how are you addressing them?
So I think as an industry, one of the biggest set of challenges that we face today is the competition for talent. We often describe this as the cybersecurity skills gap, and it manifests itself in a variety of ways. Number one, it's competition for talent in the market, which is always driving up prices for talent. And unfortunately, we're not addressing the scarcity as quickly as we need to. Various efforts and initiatives in the industry are attempting to resolve that now through educational campaigns, even assistance from local and federal government. It's just not happening fast enough. So we need to come up with better solutions to this scarcity problem that we have. One of the ways that we can do this is through the hybridization of products and services. And this was one of the philosophical drivers behind our decision to get into the services business about 5 or 6 years ago when we undertook this. It was the recognition that the trend or the mode within the industry of just creating these good technologies and then hoping that our customers are going to be able to produce good outcomes with those technologies wasn't serving us sufficiently because of this skills gap. Effectively, about a decade ago, we witnessed the transformation of the cybersecurity industry from a set of technologies that would get installed and then you would occasionally monitor them to this necessity that exists today for cybersecurity to be practiced as an interactive sport, as I like to refer to it, which means that there needs to be continuous engagement with the technologies, with the telemetry that our systems are producing, with the controls that we have in place to help to keep us secure. And the best way that we can do this is through efficient security operations centers. Again, just getting back to the point that very large enterprises typically have an ability to stand up these security operations centers on their own because they can afford the staffing, they can afford the talent, the training, the retention, et cetera. Most small businesses don't have an ability to do this for themselves. And that's why we recognize the necessity to bring this hybridized product and service solution to the market. What it allows us to do is to begin to focus on the outcomes that we're delivering to the customers rather than just delivering technology stacks to them. And we have one of the most robust channels in the cybersecurity space. I think it's kind of our killer app or one of our main differentiators as a cybersecurity vendor. Many of our partners are doing this on their own today, and they continue to do it very successfully with our technology. But what we've done is we've unlocked the ability for our MSPs in particular to build these kinds of service-oriented relationships with customers, because now they have the ability to combine the offering of the service on their own, which they could scale only to a certain level because of the constraints of staffing, but then they can augment that by also selling our service. And I think it's a really good combination. And I think it unlocks a lot of opportunity for our MSPs. And ultimately, it allows us to better service our customers.
Now, Joe, you mentioned these constraints. What is the cybersecurity divide?
So it's a shorthand term that we use to describe what is really a socioeconomic phenomenon that was coined originally about 10 years ago by the well-known CISO and advisor, Wendy Nather. And she used the term the security poverty line. And that's a very good way to think about the problem, because what it states is that we have this problem of haves and have-nots in the industry. Again, just getting back to very large enterprises, let's say the Global 2000, they generally have the means, the budget, the policy frameworks and architectures, the support from their executive leadership team and their boards to make the investments that are necessary to do cybersecurity really well. And you've got this tiny, fractionally small segment of the market that is capable of doing that. And then the vast majority of the tens of millions or even hundreds of millions, small businesses and small organizations globally, whether they're in the public or the private sector, they typically don't have the means to be able to compete. So the cybersecurity poverty line describes the point at which organizations of any size, but typically the smallest organizations, just don't have the ability to thrive. And what we need to do is we need to change the economics of the model somehow. And we're not going to solve it by giving them bigger budgets. Of course, that is going to be a means to improvement, but you can't broadly solve the entire industry problem that way. What we need to do is we need to come up with better packaging of these solutions so that we're not asking them to go out and buy the most expensive technologies that are on the market in the hopes of getting the best outcomes, and then effectively just rolling the dice because they don't have anybody who's operating them sufficiently. Instead, bring packages and product combinations of technologies and services to market to where you can focus on giving them better outcomes. One of the manifestations of this that we've been exceedingly successful with and that our partners are seeing great success with also is our managed detection and response offering. So we brought MDR to market about 5 years ago. And in that time, we've grown to be one of the largest MDR operators in the world by customer count, with over 25,000 customers who are under our protection today. About 2/3 of those MDR customers were sold through our MSP partner population. So the MSPs are really gravitating toward this. They recognize the value of it, and they recognize the fact that it's just a superior model for doing cybersecurity well on behalf of our customers. And I think it allows us to navigate this economic issue that can either be described as the security poverty line, where we have this unfortunate world of haves and have-nots, or the cybersecurity divide. It elevates the possibility of succeeding in cybersecurity endeavors for those organizations that found themselves on the wrong side of the divide previously.
Now, how can MSPs have a productive role in closing the gap between the underprotected and the protected?
I think we've touched on some of those points already, and I just want to reiterate them because I think they're really important. And I think that the MSP population within the broader channel that serves IT and cybersecurity was probably the first to get this and the first to begin to embed this into their business models and their business practices. We need an ability to scale the reach that we have as an industry. And again, if you just think about the surface area in the United States, if you go to the Small Business Administration site, they share some statistics. Over 99% of the businesses in the United States are categorically small businesses, meaning that they have fewer than 500 employees. And there's over 33 million of them in the US alone. And then globally, if you look at it, it's a number that is probably approaching the hundreds of millions if you get the complete count of small organizations that are out there. There is no way that a vendor by themselves, even a collection of all of the vendors in the cybersecurity space, and there are estimations of somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 cybersecurity vendors today, they're never going to have the capacity, they're never going to have the reach to be able to address the needs of 30, 50 million small businesses and organizations that are out there today. The only way that we can successfully scale is through relationships with a global MSP network. And what we need to do as a vendor is we need to ensure that we're equipping MSPs to be as successful, as efficient, and as profitable in their ability to reach all of these customers. And this is exactly what we're focusing on doing.
Joe, what is the number one technology or service MSPs need from vendors to better protect mid-market and SMBs?
That's a great question. And it's impossible to pick just one. What I could do is I could describe it in categorical terms. So first, I would say, if you look at the composition of any modern IT operation, I believe that they all have a set of characteristics in common. And I refer to these as the critical cross-domain capabilities. So when you're thinking about how do we protect any kind of a modern IT environment, you think to yourself, you're going to have endpoint controls, you're going to have network controls, you're going to have cloud controls, whether that's security providers or whether it's software as a service or anything in between. You're going to have messaging and email controls, and you're going to have identity controls. So those 5 components, I often refer to them with the short end, the critical cross-domain security controls, just because they're ubiquitous, they exist everywhere. You're going to find them in better than 99% of all of the modern operations that are out there today. And you can't leave any of them unaddressed. In order to ensure that you have a sufficiency of signal to be able to perform detection and response operations, and ultimately to protect these environments, you're going to have some capability of being able to monitor them, and hopefully some capability of being able to interact with them either on a manual or on a programmatic basis so that you can actually do the response part of EDR or XDR or MDR, endpoint detection and response, extended detection and response, or managed detection and response. And again, just getting back to this point that there is this cybersecurity divide that exists, most organizations are not going to be able to extract the full value out of competent technology stack on their own. They just can't run a 24/7 by 365 SOC. We know that attackers are very opportunistic. They're going to wait until 3 o'clock in the morning. They're going to wait until the Christmas holiday, and that's when they're going to attack. They take advantage of blind spots that exist within our organizations. So having a kind of a service offering that provides a turnkey solution for that, something like managed detection and response that can efficiently operate on signal from the critical cross-domain, that would be the number one technology and service combination that I would suggest that vendors look at if they want to produce better outcomes for customers.
Now, Joe, before we wrap up, could you share any additional insights on the importance of transparency between MSPs and their vendors?
That's a great question, and it's a very timely one. I think in the wake of the global IT outage that we experienced not long ago, more and more customers are beginning to ask the question, how do you do secure software design? How do you do Q&A? How do you do resiliency testing? How much do you interact with the kernel? How do you do your updates? Are you doing staging for your updates, or do you just blast all your updates out all at once? This is a new set of concerns that we have because of recent events. And I think that these are great questions for customers to be asking their vendors. And I think it's something that partners need to think about very, very carefully too. Because when they're positioning solutions, they're competing with other value-added resellers, they're competing with other MSPs, and they want to make sure that they're going to have the best possible representation of the choices that they've made in the relationships that they're building with their vendors. So vendor trust needs to be critical for a consumer. A procurement office should be asking these questions at this point. And MSPs and partners need to be thinking about their vendor choices, their brand affinities, their alignments with the vendors that they're working with. And I think that there are best practices in the industry, and some vendors are already engaged in them and others aren't. I would love to see the entire industry get to a point of consistency where every single cybersecurity vendor, for example, has signed up for CISA's Secure by Design pledge, and publicly made attestations about the work that they're doing and the work that they intend to do to achieve the 7 pillars of secure by design. I would love to see every cybersecurity vendor have a trust center where their partners and their customers could go and they could clearly see all of their security advisories. They could see their incident response plans. They could see their secure software development methodologies internally. These are just examples of transparency that I think the industry has arrived at a recognition of the necessity for in a way that we've just never had before. And I always like to use the phrase, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think this is a great example of sunlight being shown on the industry in a way that we've really badly needed it.
Joe, you shared a lot of great information with us today. Where can we go and learn some more?
Just go to sophos.com. Whether you're a partner, a reseller, a distributor, an MSP, all of the information about how to work with Sophos is there. And for our joint customers, all of the information is available there for you as well.
Joe, it's always so great to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
You bet, Canada. It's good to talk with you again.
That concludes this episode of Inside the Channel, brought to you by Sophos. I'm your host, Kenna Johnson. Thank you for watching.